Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's Not Your Average Josh back here today for another movie review, and today is also the start of my Indiana Jones film review series. Today I am starting, of course, with what a lot of people say is their favorite Indiana Jones, with the best Indiana Jones, which is Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. I remember watching the first three movies maybe once or twice growing up as a kid. I honestly didn't remember much from any of these movies, including Raiders of the Lost Ark. I obviously remember the big moments that you see throughout the years that gets replayed or talked about by most people. So there really wasn't like too many huge surprises or anything with this movie, Raiders of the Lost Ark. But I do have a little bit of an unfamiliar relationship overall, I will say. And it was very interesting to watch this movie, and I'm just really excited. Great time of the year, summertime, to get into these movies. Having said all of that, I do also want to say, if you're watching this, hit that like button if you do enjoy this video. Also, leave a comment down below. What is your favorite Indiana Jones movie? What's your favorite moment in this Raiders of the Lost Ark movie? Anything you want to put down there, it's all very much appreciated. And also hit that subscribe button as well if this is your first time watching any of my videos. Or if you're a returning viewer as well, you can also follow me on TikTok and add me on Snapchat, where I will post content similar to this. But for the most part, my content will be here on this YouTube channel, Not Your Average Josh. So again, I appreciate all the support. Let's go ahead and get into this first movie in the Indiana Jones franchise, Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. Of course, as most people know, and I'm sure if you're watching this, you do as well, this movie was directed by the brilliant Steven Spielberg, and the screenplay was by Lawrence Kasdan, story by George Lucas and Philip Kaufman. Just great lineup of creators there for this movie. This movie takes place in 1936, where archaeologist and adventurer Indiana Jones is hired by the U.S. government to find the Ark of the Covenant before the Nazis can obtain its awesome powers. As I mentioned here at the beginning of this video, I'm very unfamiliar overall with the first three movies in the Indiana Jones franchise. Obviously very much beloved over the years, so it was very interesting. I was very excited to be able to dive in, get into these movies, really as an adult officially watch all these movies, including Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Honestly, after watching this movie, I really loved so much about it. This is definitely, watching this, the time it came out in the early 80s, just setting the tone, and also just almost a blueprint of sorts of how to really perfectly execute an action-adventure movie. So many of the tropes that you see in various movies, and National Treasure being a huge one that people call to. Watching this movie from the beginning, as soon as you get, Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones, one of the first really full shots of him on the screen, he just has this very menacing presence about him. The way he just goes about his business. I love the opening sequence of this movie, and also Alfred Molina being in this movie. I did not even know that. I think I had heard it over the years, but honestly, as being a kid, like I said, when I watched this, I did not remember that at all. Him being in this opening sequence of this movie, and really just how it sets up exactly what this movie is going to be. Like, it just puts you right into the mindset of the action-adventure vibe, the fun and entertainment that you will have with this movie. And again, just Indiana Jones, the way they present his character, I really love, and I'm probably going to mention it a couple times in this video, the comparison of, at the time, him playing Han Solo in the Star Wars universe, and of course Indiana Jones here, and how they both of the characters that he plays in both those universes, they hide their feelings in a little bit different ways. Like Indiana Jones, he really plays this kind of just this tough, just menacing at times, but just very a classic guy that's just he doesn't necessarily wear his feelings on his sleeve, if you will. You see that a lot with how he deals with Marion and Sala in this movie. Anytime there is any opening up of Indiana Jones in this movie, like at the end when Sala's saying goodbye and kind of opening up more in the way that he does, you have Indiana Jones just kind of like, you're a good friend. Like,
goodbye.
Look after each other. I am already missing you.
You're my good friend.
Sorry.
He just says that one line, like he doesn't quite know how to articulate his emotions or his feelings, and I just love that about his character. Just a small little thing, but just this whole opening sequence with the boulder and everything, and having to go get the artifact, swinging from the rope from one side to the other. So many different tropes and elements that you see in action-adventure movies since this movie came out to the present day. And of course, as I mentioned already, Steven Spielberg. Look, in terms of my favorite directors, it's hard for me to say what my favorite is. Quentin Tarantino is very high up there. I really enjoy him. Martin Scorsese, Stanley Kubrick. Steven Spielberg has an excellent case of being the best director of all time. And this movie, it's just such a treat to be able to watch it as an adult, really being mostly a fresh experience, as I mentioned, not really seeing this since I was a little kid. And just to see the filmmaking on display here, one thing that really did catch me by surprise, which I guess it really shouldn't with Steven Spielberg, is just how beautiful this movie looks. And not in like a pristine, sleek way or anything like that, like some fancy art house movie or something. It has the, the 80s feel to it. Like you can tell obviously so well that it was shot on film. I love the look of that. For me, that's just very beautiful to see. And then just the setting of this movie, a lot of it taking place in Cairo. And just, of course, everything that comes with shooting a movie in this time period, but also just all the work and effort that you can see put together, all the stunts that are in this movie. There's a few different sequences in this where it is just in my mind, etched in my mind. The chase sequence that happens at the end of this movie, I just absolutely love the whole sequence of just cars fucking going everywhere, people falling off cars, the car going off the cliff. It's just so fun and entertaining, and it's like, oh my god, it's just so fun to see actual stunts be done compared to, nowadays with so much different things being done with CGI. But beyond all that, I mean, just the characters of this movie, as I already mentioned, Indiana Jones. Harrison Ford is just such a great casting here, and of course, with a lot of these roles, you look at it and you're like, man, I cannot imagine anyone else playing Indiana Jones. And obviously, if someone else has played them, I believe there's a story of there was another person that was supposed to play Indiana Jones. Not necessarily completely expert on that, but Harrison Ford played the role so well that I can't imagine anyone else playing this. And it's just, again, it's different than the way he plays like a Han Solo, where that character hides his feelings too, but it's in more of a charismatic, fun way. Like he's saying jokes and stuff, always just looking to have fun, go to the next mission or whatever. Whereas Indiana Jones is just more about like business and like sternness and just being a tough guy. And it really fit the time, especially with, the movie came out in, but also the time period that it is taking place in, 1936, which I really do like that story of involving the Nazis in this movie and really playing into that as well. The character Marion, played by Karen Allen, which I like her character in the Rocky movies that she plays in that, Adrian. Of course, seeing her character again, I didn't know how I quite would feel about it. It felt like it would be just another romantic lead to our protagonist. Didn't seem like, I just didn't know if there'd be quite a lot of depth to her character. And honestly, I was pretty surprised at how much I liked her character in this. Just from her introduction where she's drinking that dude under the table and just having a drink off with them in that moment where she's like acting like she's about to fall over and then she slams the shot glass down. It's such a cool introduction to her character to be like, this like really badass independent woman who can stand on her own, but it also didn't feel forced. Like it felt very natural. I'm like, oh, this is just who her character is.
Trust me.
Karen Allen played the character so well, and I was just really immediately like endeared to her character, and I was rooting for her along with Indiana Jones. And I like just what they did with that character. Again, it could have felt very forced. Nowadays, I feel like just naturally there would have been already people coming out saying, oh, well, it's woke shit. She's got to be, a fucking, she's got to be an independent woman. She can't, be by her man or whatever. But I thought that they just did it in such a natural way. And then the time it came out in, it was something that felt very different, at least for me, even just watching it nowadays. But I thought she just did a really great job in this movie. She'll go at Indiana Jones at time, almost have this, they have the romantic relationship obviously down, but they also have this like brother-sister vibe at times where she's not afraid to go at Indiana Jones and be this like brazen person who just isn't like this helpless damsel in distress, which is one of the things, if I do have anything that's close to like a mixed aspect with this movie, which I'll go ahead and say I don't really have any negatives with this movie, but in terms of one thing that might be a mixed aspect, it is how that at times they handled Marion, the character. I appreciated it overall. I already said I liked the writing of her character. I liked how she portrayed it. But it did seem like it was pretty repetitive where they would go to the damsel in distress trope in this movie with her. And a part of me is like, do we really need to go to this? Like in so many movies, especially action adventure movies, it's always like, oh, our protagonist has got to go save the girl along with doing what he's doing. There's an element of that in this movie that feels like, okay, that part didn't feel so fresh as it could have, or as a lot of this movie does. Every time she was damsel in distress, you know, she was captured, Indiana Jones had to go get her, she was still true to her character. Like, she was never like, oh no, poor me, oh helpless me. Anytime she was doing that, she was acting, playing into that character to try and fool whoever her captor was, whether it was Belloc or any of the other evil Nazi motherfuckers. So I gave it a pass overall, ultimately, because I thought it worked. I thought, yeah, they went to it, but it makes sense in a way with this type of movie, and I thought the fact that they stayed true to her character with the writing and how she portrayed it, it actually ended up working for me mostly overall, and I really did still liked her character. Like, she really surprised me how much I did enjoy her character and the chemistry that her and Indiana Jones had. John Rhys-Davies, I believe is how you say it, as Sallah. He is just a nice presence in this movie. Like, he could have been another character that was like, he's kind of annoying. He's just always hanging around, not really helping out a lot. But I liked the relationship that he already had. You could tell off screen that he had built with Indiana Jones. You could tell they already knew each other. Coming in Cairo, and this whole undercover detective part of this movie, I really enjoyed, of Indiana Jones trying to find the Ark underneath the nose of all the Nazis without them noticing it, and how Sallah was helping him out. I really did enjoy, and then just again, the way this movie was filmed, there'd be so many moments like when that one shot that I'm sure most people think of the sun, where you have Indiana Jones just standing there as they're digging, trying to find, you know, what spot where the Ark is at, and there's just moments like that where you're just like, man, that is a fucking beautiful shot. There's creative shots throughout this. Of course, all the moments where you have the camera still and Indiana Jones running up and it just goes right up to like immediately a close-up on his face. There's cool moments like that in this movie that is just, as a person who loves film, or, you know, just loves movies in general or whatever, it's just really just a nice little moment in the movie, a nice little moment of artistry, I guess you will say, where you're like, oh, just little moments to appreciate throughout this movie. Now, in terms of the antagonist in this movie, I thought they actually did a pretty neat thing with this that I appreciate, and I'm sure other people have probably mentioned it over the years, but with Paul Freeman as Belloc. At first, I kind of honestly, same thing with Marion, on how I kind of had a predisposition, or, you know, had my own thoughts going into this movie of how I thought his character might be. Belloc, he was very much an interesting villain. Like, I don't think he was a straight up villain like all the other Nazi motherfuckers in this movie. I did like how there were times throughout this movie where you could tell he shows care to Marion. Like, there's plenty of times throughout where they're going to throw her down, trap her with Indy, or where they're going to, like, you know, capture her and take her away, where he's like, nah, don't do that. I can take her. Let me try and, you know, take care of her. Like, you could tell he had a care for Marion in this movie. That wasn't just some evil, sadistic thing. And there definitely was also that creepy level to his character, which I like the dichotomy there. Of, you could tell there was something weird about the guy. He definitely has his crazy ideas that in the end, just fucking, he's out of his mind in a certain part of his head. But there is a level where I did appreciate how you could see kind of the human in him. He wasn't just a straight out and out villain like a lot of the Nazis in this movie were. They were definitely played more of that role, being the straight up villains for this movie. But I did like Belloc. You can tell, like, he was kind of a slimy, creepy guy. But there are times in this, like that whole moment where he's sitting with Marion and they're just drinking and, you know, having a good time. You're kind of thinking throughout, or I was thinking, I was watching, like, okay, he's up to something nefarious. He's probably going to do some crazy shit like poison her or something. They're really just having a good time drinking, it seems like, watching it. And it's not until the Nazi motherfuckers come in, and you can see, like, even in his face, like, he doesn't want her to be hurt or anything. Like, he has this, like, level of human quality to him. You know, that a lot of villains, especially, like, in the 80s and stuff with movies, that you know, just didn't have. It was just all like, oh, he's a straight up villain, he's evil as fuck, and there's really nothing explained, and he's just an evil motherfucker. Whereas this antagonist, if you will, I really did like kind of a little bit of the conflict, I guess you will say, in watching his character. But for the most part, yeah, in the end, you obviously know, like, okay, he's on the bad side, though, so it wasn't like it was, you know, he was on that line where it's like, oh, he might end up being good or something. You always still knew, like, okay, the stance that, yeah, he's working for the bad guys, he's made the decision already, so it was a nice line to balance while also still being very stern, like, yeah, he's part of the bad people in this movie. But it's really kind of appreciated the way they went about that with the writing of his character, with the filmmaking of this movie. Some visual imagery in this movie that is very intense, especially, of course, you know, the time it came out in this movie still being a PG movie, despite some of the very wild, crazy, or just pretty intense imagery, as I said. The way they use snakes and spiders in this movie, I will say, like, the spider sequence in the opening when the spiders are crawling on them and stuff, like, that gave me like made my skin crawl. And then the snake sequence, like that was really impressive of how that really got me. Like the way they would use the sound effects, and like you would hear the hiss, and all of a sudden it would cut to a snake like fucking jumping out. Like I get definitely creeped out with snakes and spiders, and they really just utilized that so well in this movie, where I was just like, oh my god, like the whole time, like get the fuck out of there. Like I was just in on this movie, exactly what they wanted to get from the audience from that sequence. It's just so many cool moments like that in this movie. I already mentioned the last chase sequence where you basically have a full-on car chase through this place in Cairo where everyone's digging stuff up and cars are flying, bodies are going everywhere. The stunts in this movie is just warmed my heart so much to see. And I just, watching this movie, I can see why it is so beloved. And also, one thing I definitely have to mention is the pacing with this movie. Like, I was looking at the time, I think it was right in the time after Cairo when, you think Indiana Jones and Marion, they got the Ark, they're trying to get away, they do get away in the speed chase. The local people help them out. I looked at the time, I was like, oh man, it's only about like an hour and a half into this movie. I was kind of thinking it was going to be nearing the end of the movie here. It just kind of felt that way. And I was like, oh man, it's still got about 20, 25 minutes left in this. And I was just surprised because like the movie was paced so well. Like so much stuff happened. Like the plot is constantly being propelled forward, but it never feels rushed or convoluted. Like it just feels like, oh yeah, like I'm on a great adventure ride, and the movie's like just under 2 hours. And it's just like, honestly, like the perfect timing for this movie. Like it felt like any fat they had in this movie, they completely cut it out and like, nah, we're going to get right to the chase. Like whatever's going on, it's constantly moving the plot forward. But again, it just never feels rushed. And that's just, it's such like an understated, probably underappreciated thing with the movies and with directing and everything. And in terms of pacing, and especially with a movie like this, an action adventure film where, again, it can just sometimes feel like you're rushing past stuff too fast. But they got it down so well in this movie. And for it to be the first movie getting introduced to Indiana Jones, like it's such a great introduction. Again, keep going back to that opening sequence. You get this whole idea. Okay, you know who Indiana Jones is, but you're not like, I was never like, okay, I kind of want to get into his backstory a little more. Like I just was like interested in the story that was already developing, and then you get, of course, his buddy coming around saying, hey, the Nazis are looking for this Ark. Can you go try and find it first? And then you're just immediately on that main story of what this movie is. And I just was taken by it. I was immersed into the world. All these years later, there are some cheesy moments with this, but one thing I really noticed and appreciated as well was the fact that this movie came out in the early 80s. It has like a few moments here and there of like 80s cheese pop up that you'll notice, and you'll be like, oh yeah, there's starting to be that 80s cheese that I know and love sometimes. But they use it so well. It's like very sparingly, at least it feels to me, that you still keep some of that intensity. Like that last sequence, most everybody knows from this, where the dude's face is melting, the one dude explodes, and the other motherfucker's on fire. Very intense imagery, and if this movie had just played too much into the cheese at times or too goofy, I think it would have felt a little bit like abrupt, like moments like that would have been like, whoa, we're going a little too far with this. But I thought they really did ride the line of being pretty intense at times with having those little goofy moments, like with the monkey. When Marion's trying to hide the fucking monkey making noise and having the Nazis find her, and then going from like a goofy moments like that with the monkey, and then you have the monkey getting poisoned by the dates and just fucking keeling over. Like that was it with that. Like they do moments like that. You're like, oh shit, like that's a pretty real moment. That monkey just fucking died. Or there's just moments like that throughout this where it kind of switches up a little bit. And you're like, oh man, this is kind of an intense moment here, but it never felt out of place. Like it's just such great directing. And one sequence I also have to mention that I really did enjoy, when Indy first goes to see Marion again in Nepal. First of all, the setting of all the locations that they go to this movie, along with just how some of the explosions look very real. It all like adds to the immersive quality with this movie. But when he goes to see her in Nepal, that whole sequence where you end up having basically a shootout, an Old West saloon shootout, if you will, getting these like Old West vibes in this movie. It fits so well though, even though like in this setting of Nepal, and then just ending, of course, with the bar that she's in ended up being on fire and everything. And it was just such a cool, entertaining sequence. There's just a few of those in this movie that, of course, are pretty iconic at this point and just add to the overall entertaining quality. And that's one thing. The main thing I come from with this movie is the brilliant filmmaking, the beautiful pacing with this ride, but then just the overwhelming, entertaining, and fun time I do have with this movie. And then just the fact that Harrison Ford I mean, there's a reason why this character is so iconic at this point. And Harrison Ford just does it so well. Again, in a different way than Han Solo at the time. It's so cool to see him play a hero in this way that, yeah, he's very rough around the edges, but there is moments in this movie also where you get the soft side of Indy when he's laying in bed and he kisses Marion there for a moment right before he goes to bed and passes out. And you have those moments where he does open his shell up a little bit, but overall, just you can't help but love that rugged character, that badass that gets anything done. And there is a fair amount of convenient shit that happens in this movie, like when Indiana Jones and Marion are trapped in that, where they found the Ark, where all the snakes were. Once they break that main wall down, it takes them it seems like a few seconds where they find, oh, here's a little place in the wall that just pushes right out. Like it didn't have it's just a place to just get right out. And there's moments like that in this movie. Of course, the big chase sequence, which look, it's very awesome, but Indy being outside the car, straddling on the hood, somehow going underneath with the car moving as fast as it was, climbing underneath, getting around the back, going back up, knocking the dude out, and taking control of the car. Look, it's a very badass moment. I love it so much. But it is a moment where you're like, okay, that's definitely starting to border the line of unrealistic shit. But it was just on that line to where you're like, you know what? This movie has been so good so far. And that's where I think a lot of times with movies, in any, action, adventure nature, you're going to have, people, complain about these certain things. But I think, honestly, if a movie is good, it's well written, it's very well filmed, you're going to give more passes to this stuff, I think, generally. And that's where I do have with something like that. Like, it just turns into a very badass moment where, if the movie was poorly written or something, you'd be like, oh, man, so this guy's just going to go under the car now and then come back around. Man, this movie just is not being written very well. But when the movie has been done so well up to the point that this happens, for me, yeah, it's a little unrealistic, but it's just such a badass moment. And at that point, you just can't help but just root for Indiana Jones. I really did love how this movie ended as well. Like, after that huge sequence where the dude's face melts, everyone catches on fire, basically fucking gets incinerated, basically, by this Ark of the Covenant. I do really like how it's not an abrupt ending, but it's very, clean and cut and okay, this is the end of the movie. Like, they go right from pretty much that sequence to Harrison Ford as Indy, of course, having the conversation with the dudes who sent him out to look for this shit in the first place, and it was like, so you're keeping this in a nice place, right? And they're basically ambiguous about yeah, it's in a safe space. I'm not going to tell you where it's at. You basically have that scene and goes right to Harrison Ford talking to Indy, talking to Marion again, basically having their little chit chat there as they're going down the steps. And then it cuts right to them putting the Ark amongst all this other shit. Just all the bunch of shit where you're like, okay, they're obviously not keeping close care with this. And then it just ends there. The credits come up with that scene of them, someone putting it in just a big ass, huge warehouse of sorts or some shit with all this other shit that's supposedly probably important. I just love how you just have a few quick scenes and then the movie ends. For me, it just felt really nice. It just really put an exclamation point on the great pacing that this movie is. And I think, again, I know I mentioned that probably several times, but it's just so well done. That's part of the reason why I had such a good time with this. And I'm very interested to see, where it goes from here. This movie set such a high bar for not only this genre, but this franchise. So going back to it now, I'm interested to see what I think of Temple of Doom and Last Crusade. But yeah, as far as this movie goes, this is definitely one of Spielberg's greats. I can't argue with really much people or anybody that says that this is their favorite Spielberg film. It's so hard because he's made some great ones. I mean, pretty much of any genre you can think of, just go down the list. But just watching it, you feel like you're seeing something classic take place. And just, again, some of the imagery, the way the stuff was shot, Indiana Jones first going down, discovering where the Ark is, the way the light beams in, to where there's so many just cool shots where I don't want to take my eyes off the screen. And then just the fun adventure quality that the plot is it's easy enough to follow. It's not very complex. You have just enough to pull for your protagonist and then, of course, go against the evil motherfuckers. And it helps that they are Nazis at that point. One of the moments that really, I think, best relates or describes maybe the quality that I love the most about this movie, the fun nature, along with the kind of just the real shit that does go down in this movie, The moment where, of course, Indiana Jones is looking for Mary in Cairo. She's being hidden in those big baskets or whatever, and he's trying to pull him down, looking for him and all that shit. And then you have that one dude come out with the big-ass blade. And Indiana Jones just had that brief moment where he's like, I'm just going to pull my gun out. And like, that might be ultimately my favorite moment. Split moment that I think of in this movie, because it shows like kind of the fun nature in a way of Indiana Jones, but also the fact that he's not afraid to fucking just murk people. Like, I love that quality about him, because again, it really differentiates itself from his character of Han Solo at the time. It feels like Indiana Jones is way more like willing and apt to doing this, and he's just, again, much more of that kind of hardened, like, I'm gonna get business done when I'm gonna get it done, being a badass hero that also just has this fun charisma about him. It's just such a great character, and you can see why it's so beloved. Not one of my favorites still, in terms of the character, of like one of my favorite characters in all of film. But I will say, watching this movie now, definitely need some more time to marinate on it in terms of like, oh, it's one of my favorite movies of all time. But I could see myself definitely revisiting this movie way more often, of course, now that I've seen it again. But yeah, I just had such a blast with this movie, other than the few little mini qualms, I guess you'll say, gripes, a little nitpicky stuff, the thing with Marion and the damsel in distress, and then some of the convenient things that happen in this movie that, look, you're just going to get in most movies, but also most action adventure movies. And again, I think a lot of that stuff, like when people talk about convenient moments that happen in movies, like, certain things that is just there where it seems like to propel the plot along, I think it really does go back to how well is the writing around these moments. And I think, again, the moments you do get that in this movie, like the main one I do think of is Marion and Indiana Jones being able to just get out of where they were trapped by pretty quickly after knocking that one wall down, and finding, oh, let's push this out and get right out here. It's so much more forgivable when the rest of the movie is just so well done and the writing is there, cinematography, everything, the locations, just I can't also just state enough how this movie is complemented so much by the fact that everything looks so practical. Like the explosions, again, all the stunts that are done, that huge chase sequence that's probably maybe my favorite overall just sequence in the movie. And one thing I do also have to mention, maybe actually, other than the moment I mentioned with the dude holding the blade, Indiana Jones just pulling out his gun and I'm murking him, maybe my other favorite, like, just split second, like, moment in this movie is when you have the big Nazi motherfucker coming at him, and really that whole sequence, I just loved how, like, it was very realistic. It was a very hand-to-hand combat fight for most of it. Around this plane that is going, you have Marion fighting the dude in the plane, and all of a sudden it's starting to go, it's starting to turn around in circles and shit, the blade's going, and you have this dude just kind of beating Indiana Jones' ass for most of this, and it really, like, it's just very realistic fight here. Indiana Jones is getting his licks in, which I like as well, because it shows just how tough his character is. But man, that moment when you see the blade coming and you know it's going to hit this dude, and you just get the quick sound effect of it cutting him, and then it cuts right to the Nazi symbol on the plane, the blood splatter on it. That's such a badass, like, metal moment in this movie. That and the one where Indiana Jones shoots the dude with the big blade. That is definitely my two favorite sequences in this movie. But yeah, pretty much just talking glowingly about this movie. There's probably some stuff I didn't mention that also I loved within this as well. It's just a very well-made movie. Honestly, as near perfect as you can get of a movie within this genre, again, action adventure. It's such a high bar. It's just going to be so interesting now to see where I land with the other movies, because I don't see you being able to top this, and maybe you can come somewhat close, but it's such an interesting level. It's like great because you start your franchise off on this incredible high and just fucking catapult it forward, but you had that thought of like, fuck, how do we do a sequel that is comparable, that is, good enough for this? And so it'll be interesting to see Temple of Doom after this. But yeah, that's pretty much my main thoughts, my long-winded thoughts for the most part on this movie. Of course, 40 plus years old now, and a very much a classic. I already knew it was a classic going into this, but just more reinstated in my mind. Just wonderful filmmaking all around. Steven Spielberg, one of his best movies for sure. One other thing I didn't quite mention, which I feel ashamed, I actually stopped recording here, John Williams. The fact that I didn't mention him in this review at all, I mean, not that I need to fucking glow about John Williams, because he's probably is the best composer in all of film history. Maybe, I don't know. Obviously, don't want to disrespect anybody else, but obviously his score here of the Indiana Jones theme and everything throughout this movie, it's just used so well, and it's just, of course, is one of the classic, maybe the most classic, right up there with his Star Wars theme. I mean, it's just really crazy, all the great Jurassic Park, all the great music that he's made in film history. It's obviously great to see it here. And one thing, of course, everyone's always, of course, going to compliment him for the Indiana Jones theme in this, but one of the things I did like specifically about the music was the Marion and Indiana Jones moments where you had almost like similar notes to Han Solo and Leia when they're having their little moments. At least it felt like it was similar to Leia and Han. So really did appreciate that. And yeah, just had to mention, of course, the great John Williams. Just such a great score for this movie. I mean, what can you say? He's just done so many classics at this point. But that's my main thoughts. I'm going to give Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, that's right, a 10 out of 10. I was really considering it. I watched this movie last night, and all day I've been like thinking in my head, I'm like, am I going to give it a 10 out of 10? I have these small little nitpicky things. Are they enough to even change it from being a 10 out of 10? And I don't think, for me, I just see this movie as a 10 out of 10. And again, it's my personal rating, so you might think differently. There might be some issues in this movie that you have, but for me, it's just, I couldn't remove it from a 10 out of 10. Like, I think this movie is just so well done on like so many aspects, and it's already mentioned some of the sound effects with the snakes that just add to the creepiness of that, where I'm just like, so like literally watching that, like, I don't remember there being a scene in a movie with snakes that I was more like fucking like antsy in my seat, like watching that shit. Like and the sound effects with that works so well. The sound effect of the whip, I need to mention the way Indiana Jones uses the whip in this movie. It's way less than I expected, to be honest. I thought it was gonna be way more of like a constant, like always using the whip, but he uses the way he uses his gun, other things he has around him. He really uses a full arsenal. So much with this movie that I thoroughly enjoyed. But what do you guys think? Have you seen this movie? If you have seen it, what do you think? Do you love it? Do you like it? You not like it so much? Maybe you have another Indiana Jones movie that is your favorite. Again, I will be reviewing all of these Indiana Jones movies leading up to the Dial of Destiny. Leave a comment down below, whatever you think. Also hit that like button if you enjoyed this video, and hit that subscribe button as well if this is your first time watching any of my videos, or if you're a returning viewer as well. Any support for this channel is always appreciated. You can also follow me on TikTok and add me on Snapchat, where I will post content similar to this, but for the most part, my content will be here on this YouTube channel. Not your average Josh. So again, I appreciate all the support. We're looking for more videos very soon. I should have all of my Indiana Jones films reviewed here on this channel. It should be on a playlist as well. And you should go look on my channel for that. That'll be it for now. I will talk to you guys later.